Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video. And today in the video what I want to cover is a little on the ampelography of Viognier. Then what we smell and taste in the glass for the Bow Viognier 2019. And having done that, given everything that we just learnt about Viognier as a cultivar, we're going to need a supremely simple little explainer on the chemistry of malolactic conversion. But first, a little bit about the Bow range of wines. For the last 20 years or so, Bruce Jack has been in a sort of joint venture with the Frater Family, who own a farm in Ashton in the Robertson Valley. Ashton is about 2 hours east of Cape Town, down on the southern tip of the African continent. And as you can see on the topographical map, just behind the town of Ashton, there's a dramatic increase in altitude as you head into the foothills of the mountains. And it's in this sort of kloofy little area that the Frater family's vineyards are to be found. And why is this setting so important? Well, to make sense of it all, you're going to need to take a slightly closer look at the cultivar of Viognier. Now, Viognier is native to the northern Rhone in France, which makes it a brother from another mother to the cultivar of Syrah. And this is partly why they were often planted alongside one another and ended up being co-fermented. Now, if you want to go into the chemistry of why it's so fantastic that these two grapes are co-fermented, I've left a link to another video that will explain that in a little more detail. Viognier is a grape that takes a little while to reach phenolic ripeness. That is to say, it takes a little while for the stems and seeds to ripen properly. And if you don't wait for them to ripen properly, you can get some weird, rough, unripe flavors and textures in your final wine. The tricky part about this is that while you're waiting for phenolic ripeness, your sugar levels can ramp up really quickly, all the while watching your natural acid levels plummet. And what you end up with is a wine that is lifeless, dull, and flabby, with alcohols that are ridiculously high as a result of all that sugar. What makes it worse is that Viognier doesn't have very high natural acidity to start off with, which sets you on a terrible trajectory. Luckily, if it's farmed well, Viognier can be a wine that has the sort of body and mouthfeel of a great Chardonnay, along with the explosive aromatics and fruits of something like a Gewürztraminer. So let's see what the Bow actually offers us in the glass. Now, when we think about classic Viognier, we have notes of citrus and peach fruit, and then various types of flowers, and then often there's also a sort of almondy marzipan element. So when we give this guy a sniff, it's unsurprising that we get a lot of those same notes. There is a sort of mandarin peel element going on rather than citrus fruit, but also with some fresher apricot and peach. And then there's lovely floral honeysuckle elements, as well as a savory, smoky oak element going on, and some rather quite pronounced nutmeg spice. Now, the wine only spends about 6 months in oak, but it should be noted that at least 50% of that oak is American oak, which obviously throws a lot more of those lactones and vanillins and other compounds that contribute to the presence of oak in a wine. For what it's worth, I don't think it obscures the fruit, but rather just adds a little extra complexity. So when we get around to sipping it, we're greeted by something that we really didn't expect, given that we see Viognier as a low acid wine. There's a quite elegant limey acid with tart white grapefruit elements up front. That softens a little as you get your sweeter peach fruit coming out, but then the peach fruit melts away and what you're left with is a really very persistent tart green apple acidity at the back end. The question is, how did this acid get there? We've been talking all along about how Viognier doesn't have that naturally. Now, the first answer could be that there are boatloads of tartaric acid thrown in, but winemaker Thornton Pillay assures me there was no acid added. So the next thing we'd look at possibly is the fact that there is 15% Chenin Blanc in the blend. And Chenin Blanc is a high acid cultivar. And when we taste those white grapefruits, I'm pretty sure that some of that really does come from the Chenin Blanc. But it's a more pervading sort of acidity, and I think the answer perhaps comes from malolactic conversion, or rather the lack of. Okay, so like what even is malolactic conversion? Well, malic acid is an organic acid named after the Latin word malus, which literally means apple tree. And it describes an acid that is really quite sour. It's got a lot of those tart green apple notes, surprise, surprise. Lactic acid, on the other hand, is a far less sour organic acid. And interestingly enough, that's where sourdough bread gets its soft, gentle little tang from. So how are the two connected? Well, there's a little Rumpelstiltskin-style bacteria called Enococcus ini, and he's really quite impressive because he manages to be a bacteria in a super harsh environment like wine, which is low pH and high alcohol. But he still manages to hang in there. And what he does is metabolizes the sour malic acid, this tart green apple acid, into the soft, creamy, textured lactic acid that can fill out the mouthfeel of a wine and sometimes bring those sourdough elements. On some of South Africa's richer Viogniers, malolactic conversion is allowed to complete the process 100%. Almost all of that malic acid is turned into lactic acid. And so what you have is a really marked reduction in perceived acidity. But on this particular wine, winemaker Thornton Pillay only allows 50% malolactic conversion to take place before it is artificially halted. This means that 50% of that malic acid stays in that super eye-watering tart green apple freshness, which is missing from so many other Viogniers. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, why not subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo wine channel, where you can watch literally hundreds of videos that I publish, where we talk about wine science, viticulture, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the South African winelands.